over 1,200 museums in Japan, yet this fact is often little known to overseas visitors. Many had limited information available in English until art historian and author Sophie Richard published her book, The Art Lover's Guide to Japanese Museums. She visited nearly 200 museums across Japan and curated a diverse selection of highlights for this guide, sharing stories behind places shaped by history, architecture, and incredible collections, showing why every museum is worth visiting. In this program, Sophie talks about the museum landscape in Japan and gives some of her recommendations for your next trip.
Well, welcome everybody. I'm Steve Pollack, President of Japan Society of Northern California, and I want to welcome you to our program today on the Art Lover's Guide to Japanese Museums. We're very excited to have this program and opportunity to chat with Sophie Richard, the author of a wonderful guide to Japanese museums. It says art museums, but actually covers a very wide spectrum of different museums and cultural institutions across Japan, not limited to Tokyo. And so we're very excited to have her share her experiences in different museums and her history with the Japanese art scene. As many of you know, Japan Society of Northern California is a nonprofit organization. We actually just celebrated our 120th anniversary last year. We were started in 1905. And we are delighted to bring you a mix of programs across many different segments, from arts and culture, traditional arts and culture, innovation, technology, business, healthcare, politics and policy, and many other types of programs. And so we hope that you will participate in whatever you have the opportunity to join us for. In fact, we have another program later this week, a screening of the Japanese movie Kokuho. So for those of you who are in the San Francisco Bay Area, you may wish to attend that program that will take place Friday night, February 20th, in San Francisco at the Roxy Theater. So we are co-sponsoring that event with the Roxy Theater and look forward to seeing some of you there. And then I'm very excited to also announce that on March 3rd, we have a program coming up with Steve Bimel of Japan Craft 21. So some of you may be familiar with programs we've done about Japanese lacquerware, textiles, gardens, aesthetics, and many other programs. And this one will feature traditional and contemporary masterpieces from Japanese art. So I hope you'll be able to join us for that. That will be an online program on March 3rd. So it should be a great chance to learn a little bit more about what's going on with Japanese art traditions in today's world. Well, let me just give a quick thank you to our co-sponsoring organizations, some of you who are with us today and have encouraged some of you to join us: the Japan American Society of Hawaii, Japan American Society of Oregon, Japan American Society of Houston, Japan American Society of Colorado, Japan American Society of Kentucky, and the Japan American Society of Washington, D.C. So we're very pleased to be able to bring this program to you today, and thank you all for joining us. At the conclusion of today's program, you'll receive a short feedback survey. So I hope you'll take a minute to fill out your thoughts about what you liked about the program, what could have gone better. It's very helpful for us to get feedback on our programs and what we can do. So please look for a link to that survey at the end of the program. And without any further introduction, let me pass the mic to Bob Newman, who will be moderating today's event. Bob is actually the one who came up to me at a recent general members meeting and said, "You've got to put on the program about this wonderful book about Japanese art museums." And so we thought that he would be a perfect person to talk to Sophie and introduce her book and lead the discussion today. So Bob, do you want to start off and welcome our guest and tell us about today's program?
Yeah, sure. I'm really thrilled to have Sophie Richard here today. She wrote the best book I can imagine on Japanese art museums. And what I like about the book is, there's so many things. I mean, it was really a brilliant way to create this. So it has, 120 different art museums, and then another 50 museums that she mentions. But each museum that she talks about has, it's got a few photographs that give you an insight into what to expect at the museum, and then a lot of information on what's special about that, why you should be interested in it, anything unusual or spectacular about the museum, and they all are. And then she also has a number of other things that they kind of add to the experience of this book. Um, yeah, so so the photographs are one thing, and then she also, of course, has the address of the museum and in Japanese, so that you can just give it to your a cab driver and point to it, and he'll plug it into his GPS system and get right there. But also for a lot of people, taking the subway system, she even has the exit that you take, to get to the museum. And if you've ever been to Shinjuku or Ueno Station, coming out the wrong exit is pretty disastrous. Um, so she has that, and then also she has, the websites there. So if you're planning to go to the museum, you can check their website and see what events are coming up and what exhibitions they have, and so on. Another really great thing about the book is a section called While You're There. And so if you, let's say, go to the Ota Museum in Tokyo, she'll also mention, while you're there, you should really also go to the Meiji Jingu and things like that. She also has useful tips on just in general how to enjoy Japanese art museums the most. And then at the end of the book, it has a list of the different types of different focuses that museums have. So for instance, ceramics or woodblock prints or whatever. And she'll list, maybe 10 or 12 museums that you really should go to if you're interested in those particular areas. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And then she also has at the end a glossary that has maybe some terms that might be used in the descriptions, and also a timeline to keep you kind of on track. So Sophie is in London, probably having much better weather than we're having right now. So I'll turn it over to Sophie, and she can begin her presentation. And again, thank you very much. It's really an honor to have you here, and it's a thrill to have you. So.
Well, hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to be with you tonight, and I'm honored to have the opportunity to talk to you about my research on art museums in Japan and my book on the subject. This is a subject that has occupied me for over 13 years now, and the research is very much ongoing. And I'm sharing it via different medium, lectures like today, and publication and videos as well. And this is the cover of my book that Bob was kindly mentioning earlier. To start, I thought I could tell you a few words about my motivations for focusing on museums in Japan. The museums were for me the ideal getaway into Japanese culture and the perfect portal to discover and experience the arts and aesthetics of a country that had fascinated me since childhood. And because when we visit museums, we do much more than just looking at artworks hanging on a wall. And in doing so in Japan, we really experience lots of different things. We can experience architecture from various periods, interior design, also often a garden that might be adjacent to the galleries, as well as some more immaterial things, such as the space, usually generous, left around objects so that they can breathe. The presence in many museums of a room entirely devoid of any art, which is a place in which visitors are invited to rest and reflect, digest what they've seen, and get ready for the next gallery. In addition, it's very interesting also to see how visitors behave in different countries. So this was all very rewarding when I started visiting Japan 20 years ago and going to museums from my very first trip onwards. But there is no denying that it could also be hard work, especially when I started 20 years ago. The language barrier was definitely an issue. It was difficult to find relevant and up-to-date information about museums. One could find basic listings about them, but you never know really what they were doing, what kind of collections they had. I noticed also that in Western publications, let's say, they would be mentioned sometimes, but mostly through the prism of architecture, when, for example, the building was by a famous architect. So you would have some information about the building, but never really much about what was happening inside. Also, during my visits early on, I was really struck not only by the sheer number of museums, but also the range and the variety of the type of institutions that existed. And this is what led me to write about them. In parallel, back in London, when discussing my trips to Japan again early on, I noticed that people would often ask me, what are the museums in Japan, or even, are there any museums in Japan? So I decided I should do something about it and to research them more systematically. And this then has, over the years, become a bit of a mission. So during the presentation today, I thought I would discuss 3 different museums to highlight the dynamism and the variety of the museum landscape in Japan. I felt it could be interesting to look at a significant museum that is being renovated as we speak. Then a museum with an unusual collection and mission. And to finish, a museum in the countryside, which is making very much of its location in the heart of nature. One of those museums is a public institution. The other 2 are private. And as you will see, each one is quite different from the other. And I will take you right into the heart of my research, which is, as I said, still very much ongoing. And it's based on interviews in each of the museums. So I visit all the sites, of course, in person, and spend time with the curators or the directors and ask them lots of questions, which they very, very kindly take the time to answer. I also want to point out this evening that this is not a presentation of artworks. In Japan, museums tend to rotate their displays at a very high rate. And so in most cases, each time you visit a museum, you will see a different group of artworks. But what I would like to do today is to give you a taste of each museum and mention what kind of art might be on view. So we will be going to Tokyo, Kobe, and then to the island of Hokkaido. And let's start in Tokyo at the Sannomaru Shozokan, which is also known as the Museum of the Imperial Collections. So I must tell you from the start that you cannot visit this museum just now. It's closed for complete refurbishment, and it is scheduled to reopen in November this year after a long closure. The Museum of the Imperial Collection was established in 1993 within the grounds of the Imperial Palace in Tokyo. It houses over 6,000 works that have been passed down by the imperial family for generations, up to the Emperor Showa, and then donated to the nation at the time of his death in 1989. The core group has grown also with additional gifts by other members of the imperial family, as well as presents from foreign nations. And it comprises many masterpieces from different periods, including 17th century folding screens by Tarawaya Sotatsu, paintings from the Kano school, stunning works from the Meiji period, and also by imperial court artists. But I have to say that a few years ago, the museum could make for a somewhat underwhelming visit, as it was housed in a dated building and of a quite limited size. So with works of such importance and noteworthy provenance, as well as the cultural significance of the imperial household, of course, the museum could be viewed as an important showcase for Japanese art, yet it was most of the time overlooked by visitors. And I have to say I was underwhelmed when I visited a few years ago, the first time. But the current refurbishment, which has been underway now since 2019, is changing all that. So the old building has been demolished. a new building was erected and then opened temporarily for a few months in 2024, 2025, and I will show you images of that. But then when the renovation will be completed this winter, this is what it will look like. That's what you see on the slide. It's a digital image created by the museum, and there will be the addition of a second building, which is being completed now. So when finished, this will expand the exhibition space 8 times. The storage facilities will be 4 times larger. There will be a conservation studio, offices for a team of 19 curators, and there will also be resting areas with refreshments, like any new museums need to have. This has been a lengthy process, divided into stages because of the significance of the collection, which had to be properly cared for. So first, one new building was erected. The collection was then safely moved there so that the original museum could be demolished. There was a partial reopening with exhibitions in the new building. Then they closed everything again, sealed that first building to protect the works, which are not on view. And they've been erecting the second the new building is now underway. And so for safety, they had to close again. So this is the exterior of the museum when I visited at the end of 2024, during the time when the museum was partially opened to the public. Due to its location within the Imperial Palace, the building needed to have a quiet presence, and its appearance had to fit in, really, with a certain amount of discretion. You see the green rooftop, it made of copper, and it was inspired by that of the Imperial Palace nearby. The architect and the design were selected by competition by the Imperial Household Agency, and the accent was placed on the presentation of works, a comfortable experience, rather than trying to have the name of a famous architect. So when I visited, then there was a show titled The Aesthetics of Imperial Court Beauty Passed Down Through the Ages. And this celebrated the partial reopening of the museum by showcases some highlights of the collection. And at that stage, only one building comprising 2 galleries was open. As I mentioned, all the works housed in the museum belong to the nation of Japan. In 2023, the museum's administration was transferred from the Imperial Household Agency to the National Institutes for Cultural Heritage, which is a body that also has under its umbrella all the 4 national museums and some research centers, some cultural research center. And this is a view of the entrance corridor on one side and then the first gallery. So as you see, it's very spacious. And to the left, you can observe a lattice design that you can see on the walls. It's inspired by a traditional auspicious motifs in use since the Heian period. It's called Hishigata, and it also appears on the outside. Sorry, I want to go back. So you see it on the outside of the building as well. So it runs through the building, and they also use it as the logo for the museum. And in the second gallery on the right, the vitrines have been designed to be significantly taller than the original museum, so that you can present all the sort of masterpieces in the collection really comfortably. And here you can see this lattice motif repeated in wood. This is a passage between the 2 galleries, and then the second larger gallery where you see the folding screens. So everything, of course, is highly protected, highly precious. Everything is behind glass in that museum. And throughout the day, I notice you have attendants cleaning the glass, every day. So it's all pristine. There will be 5 to 6 exhibitions organized every year with about 40 to 60 objects on view at one given time. And so when I visited that time, the display included really masterpieces after masterpieces. So here on the left, you have a partial view of a series of hanging scrolls by two giants of Japanese painting, Ito Jakuchu, who was active in the 18th century, and then Sakai Hoitsu, who worked a few decades later and into the 19th century. The work's condition is immaculate, and this is something that is really characteristic of the collection here. Because as you can imagine, the works have had the best preservation conditions possible. They've been, for at least a good part of their history, if not their entire existence, inside the imperial collection. And this has guaranteed an incredibly high standard of conservation. It's hard to believe how fresh the colors are. It was quite amazing. I was really surprised when I was visiting the exhibition. It was really, really remarkable. Another thing that is really exciting about that museum on top of the collection itself is that these new premises will enable the museum to show works that have never been seen by the general public before. For example, the folding screens you see to the right side of the slide on the right, they were too big for to be placed in the original museum. Indeed, many works from the Meiji period from the collection were on a large scale, as the imperial palace was so sumptuous. It had a 7 meters high ceiling. So the works that were created for that for the palace were not shown before. So these artworks will now be shown to the public, and this is really a significant development for the museum scene in the capital and in Japan in general. So I encourage everybody to visit once it reopens in November. Let's go to Kobe to see a completely different museum called the Takenaka Carpentry Tool Museum. So during all those years of research, as you can imagine, I received a lot of recommendations from people I know in Japan, ranging from curators, art collectors, artists, and friends. And this particular museum was recommended by a lady I know who lives in Tokyo. And when she told me about it, I have to admit, I was originally a bit doubtful about it. A carpentry tool museum, will it be too specialized, too technical? Is there any art in there? Is it too far thematically from what I'm researching? But I trusted her and she insisted, so I went. And I ended up completely loving my visit, and of course I included it in the book. The building is very handsome, as you can see through the trees here. Takenaka was originally a carpentry firm in the Edo period, and it's now one of Japan's largest construction companies. In fact, they have built many museums that are in my book and that you can visit today in Japan. And here they did really a remarkable job. So here you see the outside of the museum on the slide, and you might not believe me, but we are right in the center of Kobe. We're actually a mere 5-minute walk from the central station. Kobe is a very big city, yet it looks as if we're in the countryside. But from this side, the museum is surrounded by greenery. And here, this is the entrance lobby. It's a little bit livelier now, but the museum shared this photo with me so that you can really enjoy the woodwork. It's designed to look like a traditional houseboat, and it's made of domestic timber entirely. The museum was built on the site of what used to be the Takenaka residence originally. So that's why you have so much greenery at the back. And in fact, you still have the family altar and one of their historical old tea houses. These are not open to the public, but it retains the part of the family's history still. And only this part of the museum is above ground. Everything else is below ground, yet it feels very spacious, and you have 2 levels below ground. I would like to point out as well that this is not a museum created to promote the Takenaka company. But it's been created to preserve and research tools as cultural heritage. Its curators are architecture historians and researchers, and the latter conduct research to try and understand some of the methods employed by early craftsmen who did not leave text for us to understand what they were doing. So the displays are fascinating. They're divided into 7 thematical sections. The museum collects tools for carpentry as well as for metalwork, and as you can see on the slide, they're presented beautifully, very clearly, very elegantly. Visitors are introduced not only to the methods and skills of Japanese carpenters and craftsmen, but also to their spirit and their aesthetic sensibilities. And the presentation highlights the surprising diversity and originality of tools used by carpenters in Japan, and also one fascinating aspects of what they do is also there is in a number of places comparisons between craftsmen in Japan and those in China and Germany and France. So it's also very, very interesting to compare different cultures with their tools. For example, there is a study from the 1940s that is explained in detail in the display galleries, and it showed that Japanese carpenters used 179 different tools, while their Western counterparts at the same time had approximately 60. So these comparisons are really fascinating. And I particularly remember the display of a complete standard set of tools that belonged to a Japanese carpenter in 1943, collected by the museum. And you might see, if you look in detail on the slide, you have 2 of each kind, so that the craftsman could continue working even one tool needed sharpening. There are models, videos, and all sorts of hands-on exhibits throughout the museum. For example, there is an area where one can feel and smell the fragrance of different varieties of wood that are indigenous to Japan. And from among the models, I wanted to show you this full-scale tea house. In fact, this is a skeleton of a tea house, which allows us to see the intricacy and beauty of its different parts and the skills of various craftsmen who meet to build this. You have walls made of clay and other natural materials, different timbers such as bamboo and cedar, used for their aesthetic qualities in various parts, sliding doors covered in paper. So this museum, with a very specific focus, offers nevertheless an enlightening way to learn and to look at a variety of art forms via the prism of techniques and tools. The museum really strives to offer ingenious presentations. There are many hands-on displays, and it organizes various workshops for visitors of all ages. And then next, I wanted to also show you how my research has really taken me from the south to the north of the Japanese archipelago. And with this last museum, we will go to Hokkaido in northern Japan. So this museum is called the Kan Yasuda Sculpture Museum Arte Piazza Bibai. So it's a bit of a mouthful, I know, but the name evokes the 2 places that are crucial for the artist whose work is on view here. His name is Kan Yasuda. He's a living artist who shares his time between Tokyo and northern Italy, where he finds the marble he has been working with since the 1970s. So he's really dividing his time between the 2 countries. But he was born in Bibai, a mining town in Hokkaido, and he remained very attached to the town. And he decided to open a museum there in order to help the locality overcome its economic difficulties and also to offer something to the local population. It's a very personal project for the artist. He worked very closely with the municipality, and it's quite inspiring as well as very beautiful. The building you see in the background is actually an old school. It was a primary school that closed, and then with the municipality, the artist decided to use that space as gallery display, and then the idea of a museum developed from there. As you might know, due to depopulation, a number of schools are closing in Japan. So this was a way to keep the place alive. The school building is therefore used to very good effect, as you can see, to show his pieces. I love the way the marble contrasts with beautifully and elegantly against the original wooden floors, and there are large windows that let natural light flood in. And it's also very moving because they kept traces of the history of the building. So, for example, you have little scales in some areas that were used to measure the children's height over the years. So they kept that in the fabric of the building. This is another view of the inside, but truly, most of the artworks are actually outside, where there are sculptures or large installations placed among the gorgeous mountainous landscape. The museum is just on the outskirts of town, it's a small town. Kan Yasuda works either with Carrara marble, which you can see on this installation, which there is water running amongst the pebbles, and he also works in bronze. When the sculptures are in marble, these are made in Italy with Carrara marble, and then they would have been shipped to Hokkaido. And here you have an example of a work in bronze. For these, the artist works with a foundry in Toyama, a region in Japan that is known for its bronze casting. And you see how the gentle landscape marries beautifully with Yasuda's organic abstract forms. And he did a little bit of garden design as well. In this museum, there are no labels to be seen, as Kan Yasuda did not want any signs to distract our eyes and our encounter with the works. But as you stroll around the venue, you hear the drumming of woodpeckers, water running along the bed of marble pebbles. So all your senses are alive. And we're in northern Japan. Everything is open to the elements. So, of course, in winter, there is, as you can imagine, a significant snowfall there. But the museum remains open, and they create pathways so that visitors can walk comfortably outside. Particularly these ones are a series of gates. They actually enter into the forest, so they create wonderful perspectives, which stimulates our curiosity when we visit, and also our audacity, because I don't know if you can see the photo below with the yellow sort of sticker, was actually a sign, which I took the photo when I visited, where they warn you that there are actually bears in the area, and you might encounter a bear as you walk through the sculptures. It doesn't happen very often, apparently. I can reassure you. So the artist continues to visit regularly, and sometimes he had works. He's very close to the museum. He goes and sometimes likes to do workshops with children. It's really, really close to his heart, and you feel that when you visit the museum. So this is a slide with you have the name of the 3 museums I mentioned today. So I've reached the end of this short presentation. I would like to thank you for your attention. It was really hard to choose which museum to select. For the talk today, there are so many to visit, but my aim was to give you an indication of how varied and rich the museum landscape is in Japan. And so I hope this will incite you to go and visit. And of course, during the questions now, I'm sure there would be the opportunity to mention a few more. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. I have a couple of questions. So could you reiterate, what's the process for getting your book? I mean, where is it now? And
so
where can
the
we find
book
it?
was sold out last year. So it's been reprinted and updated partially. So it's been published in Japan this time, the English version. So it's very well distributed in Japan, in bookstores and museum shops. It's for sale in London and distributed by Kinokuniya in the US.
Okay, and I understand it's been also translated into Japanese. Is that correct?
My first book, which came out
Okay.
in 2014, was translated into Japanese. So it's a smaller version of the book. And yes, it was translated into Japanese.
And we can pick it up if we go to many Japanese
it's
museums.
yes, absolutely available.
So I have a couple of questions. So both the Ken Yasuda Museum and also the Takenaka Carpentry Museum, it seems like there's a really heavy influence of the tea ceremony or tea culture. And I'm wondering if, and I think a lot of the other museums are also kind of influenced by that. Can you maybe talk about a few museums that are maybe focused on tea ceremony and how the tea ceremony, tea culture maybe influences other museums?
There are many, many museums focusing on tea culture in Japan. And in fact, there is a natural sympathy between the two. Because when you practice tea, you collect objects and utensils to use for your practice. So over the centuries, tea practitioners have been collecting utensils. That's how they're called. In the context of the tea ceremony, and provenance is very important, which is also the case for museum collections. And you will collect, of course, ceramics, but lacquer objects. The tea culture really encompasses many forms of art, such as lacquer, calligraphy, painting, bamboo work, garden design, interior design, architecture. So the two worlds really converge in many ways. So you have museums that are solely dedicated to tea culture, but you have also an extraordinary number of museums that might have a gallery dedicated to the tea ceremony. For example, the Nezu Museum in Tokyo has different forms of art, but it has a specific gallery always dedicated to tea ceremony, and they rotate the works according to the season, and they have a sort of a small tea room on display, and they show you how you would place the objects there. There is the Ebara Hatakeyama Museum in Tokyo as well, which is also it's solely dedicated to the culture of tea. It was a collector who was passionate about tea culture who opened the museum in 1964 at the time of the Japanese first Olympics, and he wanted to promote tea culture and preserve tea utensils from many generations. And so there are many museums in which you can discover tea culture, either they only focus on that, or it's part of their collection.
Okay, and I've got numerous questions here. I won't have time for all of them, but I also wanted to ask you about the role of government. And so, the Imperial Collection Museum, that's a public national sponsored museum. But how does the government influence the creation, or so many museums in Japan? How does it influence, or what effect does it have on the creation of art museums, and also how does it support it through donations or taxes and things like that? And then also one other part of that is that I'm sure that local authorities, the local governments have kind of requirements for museums, and how does those kind of restrictions influence museum operations?
Well, the body that looks after museums and culture in general is called Bunkacho. It's the Agency for Cultural Affairs. It has a much smaller budget than the Ministry of Culture in France, for example, or even the UK or Italy. They have a significantly lower means compared to those countries, both in terms of the amount of their budget and also in terms of percentage of the national budget. Even though culture is, of course, very important for Japan, it's a small portfolio. And they also have to look after the preservation of national heritage and building, as well as the museums. But what I think, if you were mentioning new museums and the creation of museums, and actually what that's more driven by the opening of private museum. There is an incredible number of a very high proportion of private museums in Japan compared to what we might think in the West. You have museums opened by private individuals as well as corporation. And it's definitely a trend. As a result, there are many smaller museums, and that's, the thinking a little bit also about the tea ceremony. We mentioned earlier in Kyoto, you have the Raku Museum, which is run by the Raku family to present their family's very, very long history in creating these very significant tea bowls for the tea ceremony. So, and that's privately run. So you also have families of artists that run their own museums to promote their heritage, present their heritage and protect it. So there are lots of different types of museums. But every time I go, every year there is a new museum opening, often private. So this is actually a very lively scene. And even though the government has limited budget, there is a lot of private projects that see the light of day every year.
How did they compete? I mean, with so many museums and actually, a limited number of patrons and donors. I mean, there must be a lot of competition. And is there any kind of cooperation between them to kind of make sure that they get the attendance that they need and the funding that they need from donors?
Well, you mentioned donors, and actually in Japan, it's very, very rare to have people donating collections to a museum. The national museums receive some donations, and in fact, the Nezu told me as well they receive some donations. But what the Japanese would do naturally is open their own museum. The collector will open his or her own museum, and we've seen that throughout the 20th century, rather than giving it to an already existing institution. And in terms of competition, well, there is competition. There are lots of museums. They're often small and they rotate their collection very regularly, encouraging people to visit more than once in the year. This is due to different reasons. The size is one thing. Also, in Japan, traditionally, works of art were not on display permanently. You would take out a work of art according to the season or for a special event or special guest. Artworks would naturally be rotating all the time, and this habit is also followed by museums, so encouraging visitors to come and see the next exhibition. So you have this constant rotation of works. So there is a competition as well in creating an exciting program that brings visitors time and again to the museum.
One thing that surprised me about museums in Japan was that considering the aging of the population, it seems like there are very few senior discounts. And so I'm wondering, are there, I understand that there are passes that you can get that would give people either free entry or discounts. Could you speak about that just a little bit?
There is, in Tokyo, you have a group, some museums offer pass. There is in Tokyo something called the Grutto Pass, although I don't know if it still exists, where you bought a little booklet and it gave you a small discount in a variety of museums and also other sites around the city. Museums in Japan are less expensive than in the West. I would say to visit, the tickets are actually comparatively better value. And there are talks now in Japan, in the government, they're considering raising the entrance tickets for non-Japanese visitors, which is something that exists in the US. They just, in the Louvre, started this year raising the prices for non-EU visitors. So I think it's a sort of a general trend, and that might be coming to Japan once it's organized. So when you visit some private small museums in some big cities. They sort of group together. When you enter in the entrance, you might see leaflets for other museums. And when you visit one, you might have always a small discount when you visit a second museum. But it's really it depends on where you are. There is no general organization that offers you discounts when you visit museums.
So when people registered, to attend this, they all were also given the opportunity to ask some questions in advance. So I'm wondering if maybe we could have a lightning round. A lot of the questions were about specific types or different focuses of museums. And maybe if I give you the type of thing that they were looking at, you could maybe talk about, one or two museums that would be specifically for those interests. So if we could start with, for maybe a first-time visitor to Japan that wants to get an overall view of everything that's happening and have, really good information available, or unlike maybe some of the museums that have a very austere attitude towards information. So what museums would give people the best overall view of all the entire spectrum of Japanese art?
Well, the Tokyo National Museum, of course. You have all periods from prehistoric art to the mid-19th century, and then the modern collections are in the National Museum of Modern Art, not very far in central Tokyo. So these, of course, are the two main institutions. You cross the centuries. You have a variety of arts on display. They also rotate the collection very often, but you always have lacquer, a room dedicated to tea ceremony, textiles. You have all types of art. They rotate within that a lot, arms and armors. But you can see all that, and they're very good with providing information in English. This was a problem, especially when I started 20 years ago. It was really difficult to find information. Now the situation has changed. It's very obvious, especially with the national museums and also the big private museums that have the means to do it. So, the Mori Museum, the Artisan Museum, the Kyocera Museum in Kyoto, you have a lot of information in English.
What about ceramics?
For ceramics, okay, so in Tokyo, there is the Tomo Museum. It's called, now it changed its name, it's a Kikuchi Kanjitsu Memorial Tomo Museum. And Mrs. Kikuchi she passed away, but she was a big collector of ceramics, particularly contemporary ceramics in Japan. And she opened a museum to show her collection. So you see a range of mostly 20th century Japanese ceramics. And what's great in that museum is it's not behind glass. So you can really see the texture and get close to the works. And in Kyoto, the Raku Museum, as I mentioned, is fascinating as well.
Photography.
Well, so in Tokyo, you have the Tokyo Photographic Art Museum. It's big. It does very good shows, Japanese and non-Japanese. It's very good. And I have a soft spot for the Ken Domon Museum of Photography. So it's in northern Honshu in Sakata in Yamagata Prefecture. So Ken Domon is a great photographer. His life spanned the whole of the 20th century, and you can see all his career in that museum. And it's also interesting for those interested in architecture. It's one of the first buildings by Yoshio Taniguchi. So it's a wonderful place to visit.
Okay. Calligraphy.
Well, I can't think about a museum specifically dedicated to calligraphy. That would be quite niche. But you go to the Tokyo National Museum, you will see calligraphy. They're rotating, but they're always on view. And in many museums dedicated to the tea ceremony, there might be some examples on display, because you would have that on display in a tea room. So yes, it would be also the Kyoto National Museum. You can see calligraphy in those big national museums.
Okay, and textiles.
So textiles also, I would say the Tokyo National Museum has a great selection of textiles from kimonos to the vest and outfits worn by firemen in the Edo period to Ainu textiles and textiles from Okinawa. So you have the range of the whole country. If you are more interested in costume, also in Tokyo, there is a Bunka Gakuen Costume Museum. It's part of a university. So about half their collection is Japanese. The other half comes from the West. So it depends on their shows, but they have a great costume collection.
Okay, and
Japanese.
traditional crafts or minge?
So for crafts, there is the National Craft Museum, which a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, was moved from Tokyo to Kanazawa. So this is the National Craft Museum. It's really the institution for craft, from traditional to contemporary creation. And then for Minge, of course, the Mecca is the Mingeikan in Tokyo, the Japan Folk Craft Museum, which I think is completely wonderful. It was opened in the 30s by Yanagi Soetsu, who the thinker who is behind the word Minge and the Minge movement. So this is a must see if you're interested in Minge. And in Kurashiki, the Ohara Museum has a varied collection. You also have modern and contemporary art. But it has a wonderful Minge section that is presented in several old kuras. Kuras are warehouses, traditional storerooms. They've been beautifully restored, and you have a very good collection of Minge presented in several kuras. So that's also very much a must-see for Minge enthusiasts.
Okay, one more. So woodblock print, so ukiyo-e.
Yes, so there is, you mentioned the Ota Museum in Tokyo is great. So that's a classic collection in a classic building, a bit different in vibe for a visit is the Hokusai Sumida Museum in northern Tokyo. Hokusai lived in Sumida, in that area, so they opened a museum in his memory a few years ago. It's a great contemporary building. And there they have rotating, so the works are on paper, natural pigments. You cannot leave ukiyo-e on view indefinitely, so they rotate. And they also have a room where they tell you about the technique of woodblock prints and the life of Hokusai, which is very interesting. And it's made with the replicas, but very, very high-end quality replicas. And you can touch certain things and you can really see how things are made and discover the life of the artist. So that's a very interesting museum.
Great, thank you. So I've been sort of hogging the microphone for questions, but I think we need to open it up to the people that are here. So if we have some questions, let's see, Patsy Brown, if you want to, I understand you have a question. If you want to open your microphone and ask the question and turn on your camera as well. It's always nice to see a person behind the voice rather than just a disembodied voice. So Patsy Brown, are you there?
Hi, thank you for this opportunity to ask a question. Sophie, as a student of museum studies as well as arts management in Japan, I appreciate your perspective on private museums. I think that was one of the most uniquely Japanese perspectives to museums in my experience of studies there. I've also felt that blockbuster exhibitions were a major driving force for so many museums in Japan as well, and I just wanted to see your perspective on how blockbuster exhibitions are shaping museums and priorities as well as audience engagement in Japan. Thank you.
I visit I think I visit an abnormal number of museums when I'm in Japan in particular. So I really visit a lot of small museums where sometimes I'm by myself. But of course, you have these blockbusters at the National Museum, the Mori Museum. They tend to have the highest footfall. You know, the art newspaper for years, I remember, I don't know if it's still the case in the past few years, but Japan was always at the top in the number of visitors for exhibitions. The Japanese are ready, happy to go and queue for shows. So this is great, but I always encourage people to go and see smaller museums. It's nice not to have to queue and not to have to queue in front of each artwork you visit. So I think there is really two different dynamics where you have these big museums that are working on these blockbuster shows, which will then travel often, you know, the Mori. And then you have those museums that are a bit more quiet, a bit more under the radar, when you have a very high quality experience. Thinking about blockbusters, last year at the Mori, I saw the Su Fujimoto exhibition, which was a great sort of we looked at the whole career of the architect. And I don't know if you've seen it, but it was great. There were lots and lots of models, and some floating in the air. I mean, you were immersed, you were in a sea of models with no protection. And, you know, they're very fragile. Some of them are made of paper, very thin pieces of plastic, cork, you know. And there were no protection. You were walking carefully, and it was packed, and everybody was walking very carefully through the exhibits. And I was talking to one of the curators. Of course, the museum, like all the big museums around the world, they're trying to propose, they're selling their exhibitions to their counterparts in other countries, and they were wondering how they would do that with this particular show. They were saying Japan is probably the only country in the world where we can present it that way with no protection, because the Japanese public follows the rule. People are very careful. They will not damage the models. So it's an interesting question as well, how specific shows can travel to different institutions and how they will be remodeled to fit another country.
Thank you for your insight.
We have a few people ask the question, you know, where can the book be purchased in the UK?
So in the UK for now, if you write to me, I will tell you it's on sale in a gallery in central London. So it can be bought in person. It's in Mayfair, or it can be sent to you. We don't have an international distribution yet. It takes a long time to be put in place, but it's it can be easily sent if you can't come to London in person.
And let's see, I think we have a question from Roxana Musavian. Do you want to turn on your microphone and your camera?
Sure. Hi. I wrote my question out in the chat, but someone else reminded me of the Naoshima Island museums for contemporary art, and yeah, I was just curious on your take on kind of where that fits into the landscape and whether a first-time visitor should make the effort to who really is in this space and really appreciates art. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a very, very special place. I love it. And yes, I went on my very first trip to Japan 20 years ago, and it left a very, very strong impression with me. It's about 25 years old now, this project. It takes time to go there. So people have often compared it to a pilgrimage. So you have to put the time aside to go. It's now a little bit oversubscribed. It's difficult to book a room there. There are lots of people. Since COVID, you have to book tickets to see the various museums and sites, but it's amazing. The site is beautiful. Those islands, you see the life of the island, the sea containers and small ships floating around. And the art program has been very, very, very intelligently curated, and they've been adding buildings and installations over the years, but I feel at a slow pace, and everything is very considered. And I think so. It's a Benesse art site. It's started the project, and they have things on Naoshima, but also on Teshima and Enojima. And if I have time, I really encourage people to go to the two other islands, because each island had its different personality and really interesting museums to see. So I think it's wonderful. Contemporary art, Japanese, and not just Japanese, also international. Great architecture and really interesting. It's all site specific, and it's fantastic. Mm-hmm.
If I could ask one more for myself. So a lot of people are really interested in learning by doing. And I'm wondering if there are museums where people can actually get involved in making pottery or doing lacquer or dyeing, anything, any suggestions you'd have for learning by doing?
Well, I'm afraid I'm not going to be very helpful here because there are very, very few museums who do
Mm,
it, and even less numbers do it in English. There is
mm,
a really issue with the language for the, even sort of talks and some visits and workshops for children or adults. It's very, very rare that those are held in English. For example, the Takenaka Museum, I was showing the Carpentry Tool Museum, from the beginning, they've been doing workshops and they really want to do things for children, adults. And years ago, when I visited the first time, they were telling me that they were hoping to develop a program in English. And I looked again recently on their website and they're not. I think it's difficult to find people in English who can do it. So once in a while it happens, but it's rare because of the language barrier.
okay.
And you can find something for, for people like us, for international visitors.
And let's see, one more question from Bursa Dogon. He asked, in your opinion, what is the reason that many museums do not have English explanations in Japan?
So I think by and large, it's a budget issue. They don't necessarily have a budget for this. I have to say that in the past years, the situation has changed a lot and has improved dramatically. There was the Olympics, in the run-up to the Olympics, a lot of museums made an effort, and also the Osaka Expo. So the large museums, the national museums, the public museum, there you really have a lot more information now. It's the smaller museums that struggle, and a small proportion of them, and I've met that a few times as I was doing my research. The people running the museum would tell me, but why are you here? Foreign visitors are not interested. And my point was, I said, well, they're not coming because they can't find information about you. When we're here, we can't read anything. So it's a little bit of a chicken and egg, but some places thought that it was, they wouldn't bother because we wouldn't go. So my point is that I think you have to give information and visitors will come. There is a thirst, for learning and visiting places around Japan, and with the huge number of visitors coming from abroad. So I think the situation is changing. But there is also in Japan, I think traditionally, the thought that you shouldn't have too much written. You're there to encounter the objects or the works on display, and you shouldn't be told too much. Some curators have told me that a number of times. So we want visitors to look at the object, to encounter the object. That I feel is also changing a bit. More information is available now, but certainly 10, 12 years ago when I was doing my research, very often we would have the name and title, and that was it. And that was a little bit of philosophy behind the display. I think that's also changing a little bit.
That was one of the things that I really loved about your book, is that you really open it up, and I discovered museums that I never would have found before without reading your book, like the Intermediatek, for instance. That was wonderful. And so I think you're doing a great service by giving people the opportunity to discover places that they wouldn't have before, and you give just the right amount of information to pique people's curiosity and get them interested, and give them a few pointers of where to look for interesting things about each museum. So I think we have to wrap up the formal part of this, but maybe we can stick around for a little bit and see if people have comments. And I would recommend people, if they have any comments to make, that would be a good thing to do. But if it's okay with you, we'll stick around for a little bit longer and address individual concerns. But anyway, I just wanted to say, thank you very much. And I think Steve might pop in here too for a moment. But anyway, thank you very much for doing this. This is really great. So
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
wonderful.
Yeah, thank you, Sophie and Bob. This is a wonderful program and got me excited about getting back to Japan. Even, just looking through your book, which I bought, Sophie, I noticed several museums that I was living near and wasn't even aware of. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about Japan is that there are really so many institutions and places to discover. Even just walking around a specific neighborhood, sometimes you can stumble across a private collection or a small family-owned museum or site that you never even knew about, or probably wouldn't read about in many guidebooks, and have a wonderful experience, going through and exploring the collection. So thank you for sharing that with all of us, and I think getting all of us excited about what we can look at on our next trip. Let me just close by again thanking our partners from the other Japan societies who helped promote this event. You will also be getting a short survey to give your feedback on the program. And so thank you for taking just a minute or two to fill that out. And we would love to encourage you to get involved in some of our other programs. As I mentioned, we have a screening of Kokuho that we are co-promoting this Friday at the Roxy Theater in San Francisco. And don't miss our program on contemporary and traditional Japanese art masterpieces with Steve Bymel of Japan Craft 21 on March 3rd. All of those are, that's an online program available for free to people who want to join us. So thank you, Sophie and Bob, for agreeing to stick around for a few more minutes. And if people want to linger longer, we will turn off the recording and have a little bit more informal chat with folks who want to stay on a little bit longer and share some of their experiences or have questions for Sophie and Bob that we didn't get a chance to answer. So thank you, everybody, for coming to today's program, and we look forward to seeing you in the near future.
Great. Thanks.
Building bridges between the United States and Japan since 1905. Japan Society.